Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. Polygamy skeptics love to claim that D&C 132 is a forged copy. They'll point to the fact that it was written by Joseph Kingsbury. They conveniently seem to forget that Joseph Smith didn't write down any of his revelations. So we'll talk to attorney Mark Tensmeyer and see if there's any evidence to corroborate one way or another D&C 132 as a possible forgery or authentic document. Check out our conversation. All right, well, let's move on to one of the big issues with polygamy skeptics are the Section 132. A lot of people I know say it wasn't written by Joseph. Obviously, Joseph didn't write much. Most things were written by scribes, and they attribute this. Yeah, which it seems like the skeptics seem to fail to acknowledge. So let's talk about 132.
Right. So we talk about that. So what we have is we have the manuscript and the handwriting of Joseph Kingsbury. Now, Joseph Kingsbury, he's involved in a couple of ways. One, he's the legal husband of Joseph's poor wife, Sarah Ann Whitney, and he marries her after Joseph marries her poor wife, and at Joseph's request. And so the idea is that him being Sarah's husband would mean that she was not available for courting or anything like that. And so there's that. And he was the widower of Sarah's sister Carolyn. Her sister Carolyn had died, and he had been married to her. And Joseph had promised to seal him to Carolyn too as part of this arrangement, seal him for eternity to Carolyn. And he's also the employee of his father-in-law, Newell K. Whitney, Bishop Whitney. He's a clerk, and so what it is the story is that after Hiram gets this revelation, like I said earlier, he wants to show it to people and thinks that this is great, thinks it'll convert them. He shows it to shortly after it's committed to paper. He shows it to Bishop Whitney, and Bishop Whitney wants a copy of it, and they allow him to. Now the thing is, Newell K. Whitney kept a running collection of manuscripts of Joseph's revelations, and had for a long time. Oliver Cowdery and the Scripture Committee that compiled the Doctrine and Covenants in 1935 borrowed from Newell K. Whitney's collection. So he had canonized and he had uncanonized revelations. He had a collection of them. So it's not unusual that he would, and a few other people did. So it's not unusual that he would ask for it. And given Newell K. Whitney's, he's obviously an insider into polygamy. It's as is Joseph Kingsbury. It's not unusual that they would be involved. So one of the things that people will argue is, well, Joseph Kingsbury is not one of Joseph's known scribes, and that would be significant as if this was Joseph's personal copy. It wasn't. William Clayton, who was one of Joseph's known scribes, wrote scribed the original copy. And so this was a copy that was kept by the Whitneys. Brigham Young eventually asked for it in the 1847, 1848 in winter quarters. And before he does, Newell K. Whitney's son, Horace, makes 2 copies of it, which the family keeps. And those copies are now in the Church History Library. And you can review them, and they are word for word the same as the Kingsbury manuscript. And so I really don't see any evidence that the Kingsbury manuscript is a later fabrication. Joseph Kingsbury testified to all of this, and both in a affidavit and then also in the Temple Lot. The argument made by a lot is that, well, he wouldn't swear to his testimony in the Temple Lot case. He affirmed it, but he says in there, contrary to how it reads in the RLDS abstract, he never said that he was afraid of perjury. He just said that it was his preference to affirm his testimony rather than swear it. And he's asked a lot of things throughout the course of that thing about whether he'll swear to things that that are not even controversial, like when he became a high priest and things like that. He won't swear to that either. It's just he just didn't want to do that, so he just didn't like to swear to things. And so, yeah.
Is that kind of a New Testament thing where Jesus says you're supposed to say yay, yay, don't we swear?
Yeah, a lot of people have that, and in the law too, affirming a testimony carries the same consequence of perjury if you testify falsely. But some people you can say affirm. So in a lot of the federal hearings I listen to, the judge will just say, "Do you swear or affirm?" And the answer is just a yes. You don't have to say which one. So.
So legally, it's the same.
Yeah, legally it's the same. And so. So I mean, I read his testimony. I find his testimony pretty credible. He says what he knows, and if he doesn't, he's not sure about something. He says he's not sure. Can't remember. So there's things he's not very forthcoming about. Like when he was asked about whether or not he had been involved in polygamy, he would not answer that question. So, but about a lot of other things about the revelation, yeah, he told the story that he did. So I think that I don't really see any reason for why the Kingsbury manuscript should be considered a forgery. I mean, there's the providence, and like I said earlier, Leonard Sobey, who was not a Brighamite, and who was there when Hiram Smith read the revelation to the High Council, said, "Yeah, as far as I can remember, that is the exact same document."
Yeah.
And what's said there in Kingsbury's manuscript is pretty consistent with what Austin Coles wrote in the affidavit and the expositor. There's some key phrases from the expositor that appear there in Joseph Kingsbury's. So, I mean, I don't really see any reason to disregard it.
And of course, the other copy, was it the Clayton copy? Was that the one that got burned when Emma threw it in the fire?
Yeah. Yeah, or that Joseph burned on her behalf, but for one reason or another is non-extract. But I mean, that's kind of another thing is, you look at a lot of these things, if there was this conspiracy, it seems like these guys go through a lot of effort to, it's pretty unnecessary. I mean, like, why come up with the story about Emma burning the original copy when you have William Clayton right there? Why wouldn't you have, if you're gonna have Joseph Kingsbury fake a copy, why not have William Clayton do it? Or Willard Richards? They're both there. They're both Joseph's known scribes. Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you set up somebody as a child of Joseph Smith? You know, why wouldn't you? If you're gonna have women lie about being his wife, why wouldn't you have somebody lie about being his child? I mean, there's just so many of these things, so many of the things like that.
Mm-hmm. So do the polygamy skeptics kind of just deny that story that Emma burned it at all? Like,
she said she didn't, and I mean, and I think that that's actually possible that it wasn't Emma that did it, because I mean, we don't really have any first-hand accounts that she did. William Clayton says that. Well, Brigham Young says that in the 1852, but I mean, he doesn't know firsthand. He doesn't say how he knows that. I mean, William Clayton didn't know it firsthand. I mean, it's one of those things that I think it's possible that maybe she did burn it, but not so much later. I mean, I don't know. I mean, we had the count that it's gone, but for it's not extant. It is not extant.
Okay. What are some of the other documents that polygamy skeptics say are forged documents that are?
Well, there's the William Clayton Journal.
Okay.
I mean, the William Clayton Journal is in that, and and pretty much any of the documents that we talked about before are going to have to be falsified, and in order for Joseph not to have been a polygamist, there's and even ones we didn't talk about. We didn't talk about the letter to the Whitneys. That's actually in Joseph's handwriting.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah. It's a letter where. It's when Joseph is in hiding during one of the attempts to extradite him back to Missouri, and he writes them a letter, and he says he writes it out to brother, to Newell and Elizabeth and blank Whitney, and he says, "I want you three to come And he doesn't mention polygamy directly. He says, "I want to seal the blessings we had earlier." He says, I really want to see you. I'm lonely. I need your presence for that things." And the interesting thing is he says, "If Emma's coming, you need to stay away." And so, I mean, the implication there, it's not direct, but it's pretty clear. Like, why else would Whitneys need to avoid Emma when they're coming to see Joseph? Yeah. And so it confirms that part of the mainstream narrative of Joseph Smith's thing. And so the response to that usually is either A, it's a forgery, or B, that he's not saying they're to stay away from Emma because he's afraid of Emma catching them. That he's afraid that Emma's being followed by the law enforcement officers who were trying to arrest him. But that explanation, I mean, his letter shows concern for that. And it shows that he does want to make sure, he does want the Whitneys to make sure that they're not being followed by his enemies, and he wants to be safe from his enemies. But he makes it very clear that, I mean, his explanation that he wants them to avoid Emma because they might be following doesn't make any sense, because he's not concerned about Emma coming to see him. He talks about how Emma comes to see him. He's not concerned about that. And he talks about it. He doesn't say if Emma catches you, I won't be safe. He says if Emma catches me, you won't be safe. So I mean, it doesn't. So
I mean, because you have the Partridge Sisters where Emma got really mad. You have the Fanny Alger issue where Emma got really mad.
Yeah, Emma does have a record of not really being very tolerant of this. And, can't say I really blame her. But
right, I don't blame her either.
Oh, not at all. Yeah, I don't blame her for any of this stuff here. I don't even blame her for denying it later. Yeah. So I mean, that's another document. The Clayton.
We didn't even mention. Although I guess, have we decided that the Eliza Snow getting pushed down the stairs, that's not a true story?
Yeah, that's not a true story.
Yeah, I know Don Bradley talked about that in my interview.
Oh, yeah. No, not every story about novel polygamy has to be true for any of it to be true.
Right.
I mean, like the Underground Railroad's another thing that there's not really a lot of contemporary evidence about. Later evidence that comes about. There's a lot of folklore stories in there too. But I mean, you wouldn't argue that the Underground Railroad didn't happen because a lot of these later stories about it are not true. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, and so so there's a lot of those documents. So the William Clayton Journal is one. The argument there is that William Clayton he starts writing in one journal, and then when he gets introduced into polygamy, when he buries his poor wife, he switches to a second notebook, and he continues to make some concurrent entries.
In both journals?
Yeah, some. We don't know how many. I've only been able to find, from the published accounts of William Clinton's journals, I've only been able to find one entry, and that's that very first one, where he marries his first poor wife. And then in September 1844, he goes back to writing in the first journal, in the first notebook. And so the argument is well, the second notebook is something that he wrote later using entries from the first one, and he added these things in. And that happens. Latter-day Saints did that quite a bit. They'd go back and they'd go back and they'd rewrite a journal and they would add things to it. But in any case I'm aware of, they didn't really represent the new work as being contemporary. They made it clear that the things in there were memories. They'd say, "Now I remember this happened also." Anne Frank did the same thing actually with her journals.
Oh.
Yeah, she did. She went back when she decided that she wanted people to actually read this. She went back and rewrote it from the beginning, and added things and took things out.
Oh,
yeah. So there's actually two copies. There's two drafts of the Anne Frank journal, and neither one of them are complete, and you have to use both of them in order to patch together what happened with them.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it is. So it's something. I'm saying it's something people did. I don't think that that's really the case with William Clayton here.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the William Clayton journals haven't been released yet. They're going to be released as part of the Joseph Smith papers, and that's going to be really neat. But that's in the future. But I mean, from what we know, one thing is he doesn't really talk about future it doesn't really sound like he's making a Brighamite case. Ironically, William Clayton's journal is one of the only places where it talks about Joseph having any kind of conflict with Brigham Young, or thinking that that they have a contemporary document where Joseph says, Brigham Young sinned and needs to repent.
Oh yeah.
Ironically, is the William Clayton journal notebook too. It's the second notebook where he says that too.
The forged notebook.
Yeah, and the other one too. The other thing it says in there is that William Clayton says, Joseph told me that if anything happened to him, or anything happened to him and Hiram, that Samuel would be the president of the church. William Clayton says that. So, I mean, again, definitely not something that supports the Brighamite narrative.
Right.
And then the other big thing, this has been brought up, Joe Geisner brought this to my attention first, and this is Don Bradley and Mark Amherst McGee talked about this in their essay that's in Producing Ancient Scripture, where there's the Kinderhook plates.
Right.
It's June, I believe it's June 1st or it might be June 5th, 1843, when Joseph is shown the Kinderhook plates. William Clayton takes one of the plates and he traces it in his journal. And the Kinderhook plates were only there in Nauvoo for a few days. And years and years, decades later, when the church got possession of one of them, Stanley Kimball measured the tracing against the Kinderhook plate. It was a perfect fit.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, there's an item that was only in Nauvoo for a little bit of time, that Saints only had access to for a short time. And William Clayton traced it right there, and it's in the same day, under the same entry as when he performed the marriage ceremony between Joseph and Lucy Walker. Oh,
which lends even more to the authenticity of it.
Exactly, and so that's a notebook too, and so there's that too. So I mean, there's a lot of these things. It's, in the law, you asked me in the beginning of this interview about like legal standards and stuff, and in most any situation I'm familiar with, it like in the case of wills or anything, if one party's arguing fraud, the burden is on them to show by clear and convincing evidence, which is the standard of evidence that's between preponderance of the evidence and beyond a reasonable doubt, that fraud actually did happen. It's not the burden of the other person to prove that fraud didn't happen. For these things like a journal, that's, it's something that we have provenance for. Or the Kingsbury manuscript that we have provenance for. That to show that those things weren't fake. I mean, I brought up Anne Frank. I mean, there are lots of people that say the Anne Frank journal is fake, and the Anne Frank house have subjected that journal to every test possible to prove authenticity. And there's always another argument the naysayers can come up with. There's really only so much you can do to prove some. It's refuting a hypothetical. I mean, to prove something didn't happen, and that's just logically you can't do that. But I mean, based on what I can see, that I don't really see reason to think that the William Clayton journal is a later forgery.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with attorney Mark Tensmeyer. Our next conversation with Mark will be our last, so make sure you're signed up to our free newsletter at gospeltangents.com/newsletter, and I'll send you a secret link. In our final conversation, I'm going to throw out a challenge to polygamy skeptics. Well, I just want to throw out a challenge to all the polygamy skeptics out there. Get your stuff peer reviewed, and then I'll be more than happy to talk to you. So. Oh
well, yeah, and because that, I mean, the fact that it isn't peer reviewed doesn't mean it's true or false. I mean, something doesn't have to be. It's on a bandwagon or appeal to authority. But I mean, if you want to at least engage the academic community, that is how you do it. And I think it's. I mean, if you're of the opinion that objectively that position is reasonable, that is that is not a religious apologetic, then I think it's a fair expectation that you should be able to, make the case through using academic standards.
If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please subscribe to patreon.com/gospeltangents for just $5 a month. Patreon is spelled patreon.com/gospeltangents. If you'd like to watch the entire video, you can subscribe at YouTube, Patreon, or on my website at gospeltangents.com and click the yellow subscribe button for just $8 a month. PDF transcripts are just $10 a month, and you can get those on patreon.com/gospeltangents or on my website. I'll send those to you as soon as I've finished completing it. If you'd like to get a paperback and PDF, just subscribe for $20 a month at either Patreon or on my website. Individual paperbacks are available at amazon.com. Just do a search for Gospel Tangents Interview, and you can find all of our past interviews there. Show your Gospel Tangents pride by purchasing a t-shirt on our website at gospeltangents.com/shop. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts at tinyurl.com/gospeltangents. You can get our latest updates by friending me at Facebook, or you can also follow our page at facebook.com/gospeltangents. Become an insider and you can see the newest videos. Follow us on Twitter at Gospel Tangents. Click here to subscribe, here for a transcript, and over here we've got some of our great videos. Thanks again. Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. Polygamy skeptics complain that they aren't taken seriously. I'm going to issue a challenge to them to get peer-reviewed. We'll also talk about the charge that some people say that charging Joseph Smith with polygamy impugns his character. What does attorney Mark Tensmeyer say about that? Check out our conversation.